When you're thinking about where China is trying to head to for AI, a lot of it is driven by self-sufficiency. But as we've seen with a lot of these reforms, there's a lot of competing elements within China, and kind of putting these companies on the same page probably helps them get to the next level without, I guess, excess investment, I would say. One of the issues I think with China investing in AIs and semis has been misplaced investment. And we've seen with the government investment funds over the last decade, there's been a lot of reforms to this funds, how money is being spent. Is it being spent in the right place? But potentially putting these people essentially in the same group helps direct this investment in a more efficient manner. So overall, I think it is positive for Chinese development in terms of AIs and semis.
So, you know, with a lot of strategic industries that China has done very well, including EVs, the story has been, well, the narrative from some people has been that this is what China does, sort of let them go wild with their innovation and manufacturing, and then somehow try to clean up the excess capacity. But are you saying that China is trying something different with AI?
I think it's
already cleaning up process?
I would say it's an evolution of what's been going on in China. And I think one of the key things about China and AI is that it's always been a priority. I think that's one of those things people seem to sort of forget about, because after ChatGPT, of course, everyone started talking about AI. Arguably before that, people sort of didn't talk about it that much. But for China, if you look at the public official text, they've been talking about AI for the last decade. And arguably speaking, when you think about why the US was banning these chip productions for Huawei, et cetera, it was because of the concerns over Chinese focus on AI. But that was really more from like a national security defense perspective.
Yeah.
I do think that AI in China and globally has evolved from that. You know, it's much more about broader economic consequences for the consumer, arguably for mind share, you could say, for kind of technological supremacy, you could say. And that's why we've seen a lot of these new policies globally coming for AI.
What did you make of this whole H20 related development between the U.S. and China? Some were asking, why is the U.S. doing this? It's sort of opening up the path for China to do better with AI, isn't it?
It's a very tricky thing for China, is the way I think about it. H20, for me, is sort of nice in the near term, but my view is that in the medium term, it's not necessarily a good thing for China. And the reason why is, I would think of it this way. Jensen Huang's a smart guy. You know, he's obviously smart. He's done very well for himself. He understands he wants to get NVIDIA chips everywhere. And for those who follow NVIDIA, they probably know one of NVIDIA's biggest edge is their software platform called CUDA. And by allowing the Chinese, ecosystem to continue to use NVIDIA, you lock them into this ecosystem. And if you think about it, going to the previous point about self-sufficiency, if China wants to be truly self-sufficient, they actually need to get off the CUDA platform. So by doing this near-term deal for H20, it effectively locks you into the ecosystem more, doesn't allow you to be self-sufficient. So in the near term, yes, all these consumer platforms who want to develop LLMs, et cetera, it's great. You have not the best chip, but a good chip that you can use. But medium term, you're going to have to switch eventually. And I think that's making it tougher to wean off this NVIDIA kind of edge that they've had for the last couple of years.
And does that mean that China still has quite some way to go in terms of catching up with the U.S. on hardware? And how is it doing on the software front? And which do you think is actually more important, the hardware or the software, when it comes to, useful, effective, efficient AI applications?
It becomes a very nuanced question because it almost depends on how advanced you're talking about in terms of AI. Because there is the very, very compute-intensive AI that's building these, training these big models, and you obviously want the best chips, the best hardware, the best system. I would argue that in terms of software, and we've seen that with obviously DeepSeek and all these new models from Qwen, from Alibaba, et cetera, that have come out, that China's pretty good with software. And the hardware side, they're lagging, obviously, because they don't have the NVIDIA, the most best NVIDIA chips. But when you think of the other applications for AI, there's a lot of other things you could use AI for. We've seen it on your phones, now you're seeing on cars, you've seen a lot of different applications. You don't necessarily need the best hardware. And in that situation, I think China can be very competitive.
And also looking at the AI action plan that both China and the U.S. have put out recently. And we see this line, both wanting to have that global influence with its AI tech stack. So which tech stack do you think countries globally, could be Global South that China is looking at, or other countries in the West, which tech stack do you think is more attractive at this stage? Of course, people talk about, the fact that China's open source models are more cost effective, but there are also are there concerns about internet controls? Yeah, so how do they compare?
Yeah. I think for the U.S. side, with the AI action plan that came out last week, it's mostly about leveraging their edge in hardware. I think that's the key thing. I think when you look at what was laid out, there was the side about regulation, of course, it's very important. I'd actually argue China, in terms of AI regulation, is head of the world, and the US and the rest of the world is catching up. But the next part was really about infrastructure, and that's where the US has a major edge. And going back to the Nvidia point, everyone wants Nvidia chips, right? That's why the stock is now the biggest company in the world. And that's where I think the US has a leverage when they're going to other countries and saying, we have access to the #1 chip. But on the flip side of it, exactly to your point, that China is very, I guess, inventive in how they want to position themselves within that broader global ecosystem, because they understand that not every country needs the best chip. You know, they just want some sort of AI infrastructure. I think China is very willing to offer that to them at a very competitive price.
And that was really the realization that people had with the DeepSeek moment, right? That, oh, it doesn't have to be the most advanced NVIDIA GPUs. What about power? Because China seems to be better positioned when it comes to power infrastructure side of the story than the U.S. Is that going to be a problem for the U.S.? I mean, they've got chips, but if you can power those chips, then there's no AI.
That's right. That's right. I think there is a lot of concerns around power, and we've seen some of the power-related plays in the U.S. do very well on the back of AI, of course. And the next side, of course, is generation. You know, we're already looking at a lot of companies looking at different ways to get to base load generation, nuclear being one of the popular ones that people are looking at. I would argue, yeah, you're right. China probably does have an edge when it comes to the power side, the grid infrastructure side. They've been continually investing in the sector, where arguably the U.S. has been a little bit lagging. And I think that's another area where we're going to see more investment in the U.S. as well.